In an all too familiar story, we cover a brave individual who recalls abuse she suffered at age 3 in Michigan. Phoebe has a story. Phoebe?
I welcome you all. Please come into my consulting room and take a seat on my therapist's lounge, my shalong, or as I was just corrected, my chaise lounge, so that you can all understand exactly what we're talking about here. Because we're talking about memory and we're talking about trauma in yet another church sex scandal. When the church shouts about sex scandals at LGBT people, we know it's another cover for another sex scandal. So what do we have here? We have memories coming back to haunt a 21-year-old when she was 3 that she got out in therapy. This comes from my home state, and it makes me sick that I am hearing more sex scandals from a sex scandal-ridden church from 1989 onwards. This was published on the 13th of August, 2024 for NBC News and was written by Eric Ortiz. So, great to hear another sex scandal from church, isn't it? Especially one that has recognized sex scandals have been a problem in this church since before I was born.
Well, that sounds about church, but let's
sounds
talk
about church.
It sounds
My
about
UTV
church.
mum.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's probably right. It's very difficult to cover stuff like this, and I know that we cover sexual abuse scandals a lot, in churches. It's kind of what we do, being nonprofits and whatnot, But
we cover hypocrisy.
We
go.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. We'll come up with the musical and the song and dance later. Regardless, Phoebe, since you actually brought up therapy, what role do you think therapy plays in helping individuals recover and validate traumatic memory?
I am not a therapist. I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a psychologist. I am not an expert in any of these things. Contrary to what Richard Dawkins believes, he is an expert on everything. That's for another segment. But therapy has to be done very carefully. In a legal sense, it has to be done very carefully. Because therapists have a duty to break confidentiality if a crime or immediate threat against somebody is revealed in therapy. And if you are recovering memories, as was done in this case, or you have to be very careful about memory implantation, memory recreation, memory conflation, and memory creation. So those 4 things are different levels of reliability of memory. So the first one, memory recovery, that's as genuine as you get, going all the way through to memory creation, which is just not genuine memory. And it's very difficult to understand and differentiate between the two. So looking at this from a legal perspective, as I do come from a legal background, it's very difficult for these cases to proceed because the reliability of recovered memories is about as reliable as bite mark evidence. It's made out to be reliable and people will scream and shout from the rafters that it's reliable, but things like bite mark evidence and memory recovery evidence is not actually reliable because there's no standard behind it. There's no empirical evidence to say this is this and this is this and this is how you do it. There's no protocol to say you get it because A went to B, went to C, therefore. So you have to be very careful with the actual memory. But moving aside from the legal aspect of it and moving down and drilling into the actual individual themselves, therapy is essential for a lot of people. It doesn't work for everybody, talking therapy, and if you're a Scientologist, you will decry the practice of psychiatry. Just ask Kirstie Alley and why she wouldn't go on the TV show Frasier, because for some reason they think psychiatry is evil. But for the majority of people, specific therapy can be very beneficial. Therapy doesn't work for everybody, but talking therapy, AMDR, and such other trauma-related therapies can be very good at helping someone process the memories, because memory is very good at compartmentalizing, is very good at building its own barriers, is very good at separating things out, and it can be so that you are enjoying your life in blissful ignorance as far as the brain is concerned, and you are gradually going in there with a bulldozer and opening up the not very nice parts of the house. So you've got the house you're living in, and 1 or 2 rooms is riddled with asbestos, and you're gradually knocking into the asbestos. That's the way that I view how the brain compartmentalizes. So you put the big stickers over the door saying, do not enter, go no further, but then you finally decide you're going to whack your way in and you're going to get rid of the asbestos. But what is actually in there can be very easy to manipulate if you have the wrong kind of therapist. experienced.
Well, let's take it from that particular part, especially about memories that can be easily manipulated in order for another narrative to actually come from that. So, Rob, what do you think is like the balancing act of skepticism when we come to stories like this? Like, when a person is saying and recalling something that like was very traumatic to them, like sexual abuse, and we already know that sexual abuse is a thing in churches, right? But how do we balance skepticism and belief when someone shares or recover memory of abuse? And what are the potential risks on both sides of what we're discussing?
Man, I don't know. This is rough, right? Okay, so she's 3. She was 3, and it's a recollected memory, recollected. And like, I'm not going to say that every brain out there is like mine. It assuredly is not. But I know as a fact that I have a falsely implanted memory, I think, right? That's the problem, is because I remember when I was a kid, I was told that if you repeat something like 3 times, then you commit it to memory. So I remember talking to my friend on the phone, and I held up 2 fingers, and I said, I have 3 fingers, blatantly lying to myself. And now when I think back to that story, I don't know which one is which. Like, I don't want to dismiss what happened to her, potentially, probably, but it is just super well known that memory is wildly unreliable and people can just invent things, even if you believe it. That's the tricky part, because I absolutely believe that she believes it 100%. This is one of those validating your feelings things. I absolutely believe it. And I'm not even saying that it didn't happen. I'll even give her the BOTD and say maybe it did, but how do you even begin to process or prove anything that has happened at that age that long ago with a mind that is barely capable of holding on to memories and is barely conscious in the first place? My very first memory is when I was crawling, and the only reason why that happened is because I got spanked. So like, yeah, maybe something traumatic happened and this helped hit the memory, but you can only remember something in so much as you can understand it. And when you're 3, your brain is pudding. So like, can you even understand the thing that's happening that you're attempting to commit to memory anyway? So like, I feel really rough, and I feel bad for her because this is going to be a rough go of it. And the part that really interested me about this story specifically is she seems to be, based on the way that this is being told via the article, that she is in the absolute best position to be able to come forward with this, because the church has done so much to acknowledge its own wrongdoing before this ever happened, right? The church is hyper aware of its own abuse before the general public was aware of its own abuse. This is 1, really progressive, 2, indicative of it being extremely problematic. And the person that she claims abused her is dead. So it seems like she's just lined up in the absolute perfect way to show, I have no ulterior motive. I'm just reporting a thing that happened to me. And I go, I don't know if I could believe that the thing that you say remember did occur, but damn, it looks like you've got no ulterior motive here. This is just rough all the way.
Yeah, it seems like that. When I was reading this story, I had this duality inside my head, because like, of course, like me being who I am, and especially as a person that, is in social work and works with people who have, experienced trauma, want to believe her, right? But then there is also the reliability factor of you recalling memories of when you were 3 years old and now you're 21. So I know that I have issues remembering what I did 5 minutes ago, but then again, I'm old. Don't let the Miss Clara fool you. So I am empathetic with her plight, but we can't negate that there's going to be definitely challenges when it comes to, the believability portion, especially when you're recalling something that has happened so long ago. Phil, how do you feel about some of the challenges that, survivors may even face when they are, recalling childhood trauma and actually coming forward with their stories, especially when memories are recovered later in life?
As Rob was pointing out and saying, the challenges, I can see a number of challenges, especially with memory, as also Phoebe pointed out about how memories from that young age for her to remember exact details, or even sometimes to, we know memory, the way memory works is that you have scaffolding in terms of sometimes that scaffolding memories from other parts, areas of other events are actually sometimes superimposed on another memory, especially when the memory is like at 3 years old, to fill in, right? So it is a difficult case, right? It's a difficult case because of that fact. But in that case, to overcome that challenge, this is where now you need some corroborating evidence. People, other persons who, if it, that this will have happened to, from the same abusers, to come forward, right? That's what we call the corroborating evidence. And I think she is. And also, another thing that they can do too is to overcome that challenge is probably have her see another private therapist, a therapist that the law courts will appoint, right? Apart from her own private therapist, to help minimize bias, to see whether or not, yes, this is really actually what is happening, if her story is consistent. And I think by her coming forward too, it will help hopefully give some courage to others who have been abused by the same abuser and by others within the church, to come forward, because the more persons that come forward, the stronger the case is. And it's not just that this person is filling in memories with other things, right? So it's important that people do come forward, persons who have been harmed. And I think she's sincere. She's sincere in what she is doing. And I think she does really, truly, and really believe that it did happen. And she doesn't have this ulterior motive, because when we look at what the lawsuit is about damages, having a jury trial, and for the court to mandate that the church investigate others that are being harmed. So she has not about herself alone, but about those who are being harmed, right? And to get the church to change their policies and practices, to protect better protect minors and vulnerable people.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the church in of itself. And this question is for all of you. Why do you think some institutions like churches struggle to address abuse allegations effectively? And how should churches improve their approach in ensuring the safety of their congregants, especially the ones who would be the most vulnerable? Phoebe, I'm going to start with you, then Rob, and then Phil.
It's easy. You don't view a church as a place where people work. You view a church as a place where you and your mates go and your family go, and the bloke standing up the front is a member of your family. It's your congregation. Your congregation is your extended family. So you won't think badly about that person. You close ranks on it. There's no church HR department to go and complain to. There's no qualifications needed to go and become a member of a religious order in 9 times out of 10. You just need to say, look, I want to do it, and you can fraudulently get your way in there. There's no barrier to entry. Anyone can set up a church. I could tomorrow start proclaiming whatever I like and set up a church. People could start coming, and nobody would investigate me because I had set the church up myself. Cynthia could do the same, Rob could do the same, Phil could do the same, the producer of this show could do the same. You, the viewer, could do exactly the same. And there is no investigation into you wanting to set that up. You wanted to run a child daycare centre, you'd have paperwork stacked up to your eyeballs. But to run a church where you have children running around on Sundays or Fridays or Saturdays or whatever, nothing at all. How many members of the church have been background checked? How many pastors have been background checked? How structured is a church? Until the year 2006, the Church of England legally did not employ its clergy. They were simply post holders, so it could just be moved on at will. There was no employment relationship here in the church. The church itself did not view itself as an employer, and that's the problem. It's an employer. The person is being given somewhere to live, they're being given a salary, they're being given roles and responsibilities. You may not like to think of it that way, but that's exactly what it is. It's no different to me sitting down with a client and taking their statement and then writing it up in a briefing. When someone sits in a confessional and balls out their confession to a priest, there's no difference there. Just one society has said is an employment relationship with privilege, same privilege that that clergy has under the penitent minister privilege, but there's no standards for that, there's no licensing for that, there's no background for that, there's nothing at all to stop any old sod from just going and doing that. Yeah. That's where the problem starts. Society has put on a pedestal, out of touch and out of reach, these individuals because it does not view the institution of a church as a job, as a workplace. If it did that, it would certainly cut down immediately and have an awful lot more skepticism towards these institutions because people view what goes on in the church in exactly the same way that abusers view what they do behind closed doors in their family. As they said in the 50s, if I hit my wife behind my front door, you can't do anything about it because it's our family matter. And people view their church as their family.
What say you, Rob?
Yeah. They say that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and I actually don't believe that to be the case, but I do think that absolute power can invite corrupted people, I mean, people who are easy to corrupt. And the reason for that is because I actually kind of like dig the whole family aspect of it. It is extremely common for foster parents to abuse foster kids or really anyone who is in position of power over a minor when you are supposed to be the steward because you have a ward and you are to protect them and care for them, then they by definition do not have power within this relationship. So when churches who are very intentionally fronted as the single most bastion of pure morality, you have to believe what they believe, otherwise you're going to hell or some other version of it, right? So this means that not only am I a part of your family, because spiritually we're all part of the same big old family, and I am the pathway by which you understand all morality and how to navigate this big scary world. It just means that they have too much power. Not that they have too much power, but they have too much power in relation to the checks and balances against them as well.
Unregulated power.
Yeah, or there is really no checks and balances at all.
Yeah.
If you really think about it.
Because in some ways it's not totally different from caseworkers, right? And psychologists who'd be working with kids, except we have things like regulations and ways to manage that relationship. This is a being a pastor, being a priest, being a head of a church is a position that has historically not had any checks and balances because you are the checks and balance, and it is your job to be the head of all morality. So it's going to happen. It's going to keep happening because it is a position of power people can go into that does not have checks and balances.
Well, I'm going to give the last word per se to Phil. And the thing that I want to ask you specifically is, so since we're dealing with issues where churches are not looked at, especially church leadership is looked at the head of the family instead of actually being in a job where you have certain duties that you're supposed to perform. And if you do not perform them adequately, you can be gone, held accountable for that. And then also you have a lack of accountability, especially when it comes to checks and balances, when it comes to behavior and the things that you do in church leadership. So how can we create a culture that actually encourages openness and support for those who may have been harmed, especially when they have been harmed in a church institution?
Okay, I think what would need to be done is maybe have a specific special committee set up, not within church, but within government should set up a committee to deal with issues of, especially seeing that this is a really prevalent issue within the church, for where persons who have been abused by clergy or members members of the church to be able to come and report, and then they do an investigation, not within the church, because the church they to have an investigation, them doing their own personal investigation does not even help. And remember, the church mandate is forgiveness.
Yeah.
So the one of the reasons why a lot of perpetrators get away with this sort of thing is because the church is thought, they are sinners, and and you must forgive. So a lot of these things do not get reported to the relevant authorities like the police. So I think what the governments might need to do is to set up committees where they have to, and set in legislation that any sexual abuse cases be reported to this particular committee, who will probably be made up of some investigative police investigators too, and to investigate these allegations, and will be able to have the power to bring charges against the perpetrators. Because as I said, these perpetrators, they get away because the church internal investigation, they find out who it is, and then they move the pastor or the priest to another area, and then you hear the excuse, oh, it's about forgiving, you have to forgive, Jesus said forgive 40 times 7. No, this is a serious, very serious case that goes beyond that level. To bring, so for justice to happen, you need to have an outside independent body.
Well, you heard it here first, people. If there are calls for police to have oversight committees when it comes to how they police others, then we on the nonprofits are calling for oversight committees over church organizations and other religious organizations to investigate abuse when it happens to congregants. But I believe it is safe to say the pain of being ignored and neglected by those in power is all too familiar. It's imperative that church leaders are held accountable for their gross negligence. Survivors like Marion deserve not only justice, but a complete overhaul on how these institutions handle abuse. It's time for the church to face the full consequences of its failures and to implement real changes to prevent such atrocities in the future. And as James Baldwin said, that if God cannot make us kinder and more loving and more helpful and more forgiving and more just more, then it's time that we get rid of him. But you, dear viewer, should not get rid of us. So click here for non-profits.